What were your experiences of Middlefield?
Wow. So I first came to Middlefield in January 1988. So I worked there for probably 3 years or so before it closed down. I was trying to think the other day. I think it closed. It was starting to close then. So I think it. So I think when I first moved there was still about. Do you know? I can't remember. I think there were about 150 people still there, whereas it had been at one point, I think, a large number of people. There'll be people who know this better than me, but I think there were sort of 400, 500, even 600 people at one point. And then it closed. A lot of people moved out in the mid-80s. I think one of the things is, I think there was quite a bit of change at Middlefield and lots of other places in the 80s. Because I first worked in a hospital-based environment in the early 80s, about 81, 82. And things had changed quite a lot by 88. A lot of people had already started to move out. And there were still lots and lots of bad things about services, but there had been some sort of like improvements. I think, when I first worked in 81, 82, I remember people were in long dormitories and, and no spaces between the beds. Every bed was the same. But when I came to Middlefield, there was still some like that. So there was still, but more people had sort of smaller rooms and various things. So it was starting to change, although still, still not good at all. And I think the ward sizes, as they called them, wards, that people would say, just a few years ago in the mid 80s, there were 60 people on a ward, often with only 2 or 3 staff helping the people. Whereas by the time I got there, the wards varied, I think, from about 15 to about 20, I think. Again, my memory's not too good. Some were a little bit smaller. I can remember the names of some of the wards. It was Bowden House, Wharton Lodge, Hillgroves. So things were starting to change, but they're still not good. So there were still lots of very strict routines that people, so like bedtimes, people had a strict bedtime and getting up time. And
what?
I think, Callum, a large part of it was because there were so many people. Well, there's 2 answers to that, I think. One was that there were so many people, it was difficult for the staff to give people more enriched lives. That was the first bit. And I know when people always used to say, back in when they had the wards of 60 people, they, again, it was a terrible thing. They used to divide people up into low, middle and high, and the people who were seen as, they're called high grade, were the people who learned to, they had to help to look after the people who had more disabilities or whatever. That had changed, but there'd be a lot of the wards that might have 20 people that just had 2 or 3 members of staff, I think. So I think that's one answer. I think another answer was, though, that the staff had been told that was the right way to do it. Do you know what I mean? Which seems strange. I'll give you an example. One of the things that I used to do when I first went to Middlefield was, I was very interested at the time, was about quality of life. And I did sort of like measurements of people's quality of life, trying to see. And, that might sound it's a hard thing to manage, a hard thing to measure. But one of the items on I always remember that one of the items on the quality of life thing was, do people have a set bedtime? Now, we would see that as a bad thing, right? Because in our lives we can go to bed whenever we like, isn't it? Do you know? So we saw that as a bad thing. But when I was asking staff that, a lot of staff would say, "Oh yeah, we make sure they're all in bed by 9 o'clock," to see it as a good thing. Do you see what I mean? It was almost like they've been so told through their training, various things, that was the right thing that should happen. That they didn't really realise that it wasn't. So there was lots of sort of institutional practices going on like that, which was why I think it was so nice to work with people, and then, as people moved out, that they had much freer lives. Having said that, I mean, I think, I'd worked in a couple of institutions before, like Sandhill Park, and there's a place in Sherborne down in Dorset that I worked. And although, as I say, there were lots of these things, there was also a lot of caring going on. Do you know what I mean? I think, you know, one of the things that on a lot of wards, the staff genuinely did care very much for the people that they were looking after, and had a lot of affection, and you know, not universally, but there were lots of nice staff who did have the person's best interest. It was just they didn't realise, I think, how people's lives could be different. Do you know what I mean? That was the thing. I think they'd been told this is the sort of style, this is the way, this is what's going to be best for people, and didn't realise there were better ways for people. So as I say, I think through the 80s there was quite a big change. So I think that was probably in one way the change between maybe 1982 and 1992 was one of the sort of biggest eras of change for the way that people with learning disabilities, and also people with long-term mental health, you know, the sort of provision changed quite rapidly during that time. So that was quite an interesting time to be involved, and quite a nice time.